Hi and welcome to Two Wheels Better from the International Classic Bike Show at Stafford. Now, what is a classic bike? Classic can mean many things to many people. Classic literature, classic music, but just what is a classic bike? Well, here today we're going to find out. Well, someone who should know all about the classic bike scene is this gentleman with me, Philip Tooth, who's the editor of Classic Bike magazine, who are sponsoring this show. Philip, and this is your Goldstar.
It is indeed, yes.
So you must know all about classic bikes.
I've got a few myself, yes.
How many have you got?
10 motorcycles, ranging from a 1919 belt drive Triumph through a 26 Norton, Cami Velocette, this Goldstar, a BSA twin, a Benelli twin, a Motor Guzzi.
All right.
Quite a range.
It is quite a range. Tell me if it's not a silly thing to say. You don't look old enough to be interested in classic bikes. What's the attraction to you about classic bikes?
Well, I used to have a Ducati V twin, and I found that I could go through a series of bends at illegal speeds and get a real adrenaline rush. And at the same time, I had a 250 MOV Velocette with girder forks and rigid rear end. And you could go through the same bends at 50 miles an hour and get the same adrenaline rush.
I mean, you were scared stiff?
Not quite scared stiff, but certainly, you get a real buzz out of it, and it's just so much fun. And it's different.
Yeah.
Anybody can go and buy a new motorcycle, but a lot of these bikes, the only way you're going to get them on the road is by building them yourself, and then coming to a show like this and finding the parts to build it yourself, and then you get a whole new scene. You're meeting friends, meeting people. You rely on people to get bikes fixed.
Yeah, it's a whole culture, isn't it? The classic scene. But what is it, do you think? I mean, I would class the Goldstar as a classic bike, the same as I would a Vincent and perhaps a Velocette Thruxton. But I mean, what defines classic to you? Because it looks, from looking around here, if a bike's old, it's classic. I mean, is that true?
Well, to some extent it is true. There comes a point when a bike is so old it has to be special, and that makes it classic, whether it's a BSA Bantam or a mass-produced motorcycle. But after they're so old, you don't see them on the streets anymore, and people notice them as being special and being classic. But the more modern a bike is, I think the more special it has to be before it becomes a classic.
Well, the classic bike scene isn't just a European thing, it now involves the Japanese as well. And I'm with Dave Jump of the Vintage Japanese Motorcycle Club. Dave, vintage Japanese doesn't seem to fit somehow. How can they be vintage?
Well, the American definition of vintage is actually sort of good quality, and that's really it, rather than age.
All right, so you've answered that one. And they're definitely classics.
We think so. Some people do, some people don't, but each to his own, really.
But you've got some lovely bikes here. This little Bridgestone in front, this is one of your members' bikes?
Yes, that's right. It's a 200 Bridgestone. I think it's an import, this one. It's been restored by Jerry Ascot. We've got quite a few people in the club now who can restore bikes to a very high standard.
And how do you get on for spares?
Hunt the world, basically, nowadays. You just have to look and see what you can find,
Are the Japanese factories into this, the big companies?
No, they're not at all. They are moving on, unfortunately, not looking backwards like we are.
So it's, as you said, you scour the world, and
right.
Someone like Bridgestone, I mean, it is the same company as the tyre company, isn't it?
That's right, yes. But they were told a long time ago not to make bikes, just carry on making tyres.
Yeah. Why was that? Because bikes weren't their speciality, do you think?
No, it's because the other manufacturers wouldn't buy their tyres if they carried on making bikes.
Nothing fair, is there, in this motorcycling world? But there we are. So how many members have you got?
About 5,500 now.
So is that growing?
Yes, it seems to. We've got a lot of membership forms gone over this weekend and quite a few new members.
So when would you say vintage starts as far as Japanese? I mean, as far as years go, I mean, is it sort of pre-80, pre-70 or?
Our cut-off is 15 years for sort of people showing bikes.
Yeah.
And, it's quite a few models ago with some models,
So in a few years then you'll have Fireblades in there?
Probably, yes. Why not? They're going to be old hat as far as people are concerned. What happens with most of these bikes, they get trashed or put away and then they get dragged out again after 10 years and suddenly they're interesting again.
And there we go, the story of motorcycling.
I think so, yeah.
classic auctions are also part of the classic scene, and this is no exception. This is the Brooks auction, where you can get absolutely everything. A little Benelli in front of me, there's an MV Agusta over there, the Bruff Superiors, anything and everything. This is the place for you to shop. There's a name to conjure with if you go back to the days of John Surtees, Hartle, etc. But this isn't a racer, this is a road bike, and it belongs here to our friend Dave. Dave, you've rebuilt this bike, haven't you?
Yes, I most certainly have, with help from friends and the MV Agusta Club.
And this isn't the only one you've got, I understand.
No, I've got this is a 750, I've got a 350 as well.
Tell me, it's a bit unusual for an MV. You tend to think of a sports bike, but this one has got shaft drive. Why did they do that?
Well, so that when they were racing these in the Grand Prix, you couldn't buy one of these and convert it to a racer very easy to match the racer's performance, because the shaft drive handicapped it.
Oh, so that was the reason. It wasn't to make it sort of more, what should I say, civilised for road use. It was to stop the privateer having to go.
I think so. That's what I understand anyway, yes.
Well, there are big MVs and there are small MVs. And there's a beautiful little racing MV here, or an ex-racing MV, belonging to Alan of the MV Agusta Owners Club. Alan, a beautiful bit of work, this one.
Yes, it's a 125cc overhead cam. It was 8th in the 53 TT, and it's had wins at Brands Hatch, Blandford, and it was first in the Sunbeam Sprint in 1954. I'm the second owner.
Yeah, so you weren't racing it at the time?
No, I wasn't racing it at the time. I bought it off the original owner called Norman Webb, who unfortunately he died at the beginning of this year. But I'd known Norman for about 15 years.
It's a lovely machine. Have you restored it yourself?
I have, yes, yes.
So does it ever see any sort of competition use now?
It doesn't. It gets started up at track days and things now because the spares are so limited. Last time it was run was at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. We ran it up there for a couple of minutes.
Well, as you can probably see, we're on the Goldstar Owners Club stand, and this is a beautiful DBD 34 Goldstar, and I have with me John Walker, who's Vice Chairman of the Goldstar Owners Club. Hi, John. Beautiful machine, this one. What made the Goldstar so special?
Well, it was basically the ultimate sports bike of its day. This particular model's in clubman's trim. You could buy it in clubman's trim, touring trim, scrambles or trials. And it could be used for a multitude of uses, basically.
And so, in different cams you'd change, make it harder, softer?
Change the cams, cylinder head, carburettor, tune it down a little bit, change the guards and the seat, and you've got an off-road bike.
And it was a fabulously successful bike. What year is this one?
This is a 1960. It's quite a late DBD 34, owned by Mike Sharp of the Goldstar Owners Club. Full clubman's trim. This is as they were raced in the mid to late 50s in the Isle of Man in the clubman's TT. You could say that the Goldstar ultimately killed the clubman's TT, because if you weren't riding a Goldstar, you weren't going to win.
Now here's a bike for you V-twin fans, Harleys or Ducatis. This Vincent behind me was the 916 of the 1950s, 140, 150 mile an hour, terrific machine. And I've got with me John Wilding, who's the information officer of the Vincent Owners Club. John, nice bike this? Well, they're all nice here, aren't they?
Well, they all are. I mean, we have a special affinity for Vincent's. They tend to be a little bit of a cult.
Yeah.
We think there's nothing like them. They're the finest motorcycle in the world.
Well, the engineering on them, I mean, Phil Irving has been famous for it, but it was ahead of its time, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it was ahead of its time. Unfortunately, it was also ahead of its time on price, which was part of the reason for the demise of the company. They were more expensive than ordinary run-of-the-mill machines like Ariels and Triumphs and things like that, and people just couldn't afford them. They were going back on off-hire purchase agreements in large numbers.
Which was a great pity, wasn't it? Because, I mean, they had everything going for them, and all these nice touches, quickly detachable wheels, which we don't get these days, and all the rest of it.
Oh yes, I mean, mend a puncture in either wheel in 20 minutes and be back on the road again, with no tools needed.
And the suspension as well. I mean, we talk about now the BMW telelever front end, but this had the old Gerdrolics, and again you had this very stiff front end, but it was a proper suspension.
That is true, and the rear suspension is also a feature, because I think it was the first production motorcycle with a rear suspension system.
Yeah, which I always think Yamaha's later copied with the cantilever rear end, didn't they? You know, when they brought their racing bikes in, and they had this cantilever rear suspension with the shock absorber up under the tank there. And really, Vincent's were way in front, weren't they?
Well, this is very true. It wasn't invented in Japan.
One of the many things. But tell me, I made a mistake first off. I thought this was a Shadow, but it's not a Shadow, it's a Rapide. What's the difference between the two?
Well, the difference between the Rapide and the Shadow is the Shadow was a more highly tuned version of the same machine. Instead of having a 6.8 to 1 compression ratio, it had 7.3 or 8.2 to 1 compression ratio. The first Shadow is in fact in the show here today on the stand. It's registered JRO on the classic bike stand, and it is the first Shadow. It was a Series B Shadow which had the Brampton forks rather than the Gerdrolics, which is rather like my own machine, which is made in 1947 and has its 50th birthday on the 7th of July this year.
And congratulations, happy birthday to it then. But what's the typical price? I mean, do you mind me asking that? What's the sort of market price of a good Vincent, like your own, for instance, or this one perhaps easier?
Well, a market price for a good Vincent on the road today, a twin, you would be expecting anything between 11,000 and 18,000. Depending on its condition and what the owner wanted for it, and really what you want yourself. If you want it and you've got the money, then you're going to buy at a price.
Okay, well, thanks very much, John.
Okay, nice to talk to you, Jeff.
For all you Harley freaks out there, you might know what this one is. It's probably not as shiny as yours, XWD, khaki paintwork, but it's the famous 45 cubic inch Harley 45. And Kev here has actually got one of these on the road, but in Civi colours. Is that right, Kev?
That's right, yes. I've run it for 2 years, it's been built for 10. Well known as being extremely reliable, great fun to ride. Basic things about them, they're a 3-speed hand change foot clutch, which is known as the suicide clutch.
And why is that? Tell us why that.
Well, apparently it's supposed to be suicide to ride one in traffic conditions because you have to do all things and basically be a bit of a contortionist, but once you've got them, they're easy.
I was going to say, you're still here, so you must have managed all right, yeah. What else is so special about it?
Well, the US Army Harley made about 80,000 of these, and a lot of them found their way over to Europe during the Second World War, especially in Holland, where they're very well known as liberators over there. But of course, they were sold off second-hand after the war. After the war, you could probably pick one up for a tenner. Now, they're worth thousands. They're lovely things to ride, great fun.
And very flexible engines, I should think, being a side valve. And do you know what the power output would be?
About 28 brake horsepower, which sounds very little, but the torque is astronomical, and they will literally pull the side of a house down.
Well, if you're into classic bikes and you do your own restoration work, at some time you're going to need some spares. If you've got a BSA, SRM Engineering are the people to go to. Gary, you've got a very nice A65 here. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, it's one of our own special productions. Basically, we've styled it on the Triumph X75 Hurricane, but styled just to suit the BSA frames. This is our own special 750 gas-flowed head engine, producing about 70 brake horsepower.
Yeah, and it looks very nice too. Now, I well know your company. You've been dabbling with A65s for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, for about 15 years now.
Yeah. It is a long time. But your specialism is engine preparation, isn't it?
Yes, our main forte really is engine reconditioning, reliability modifications and tuning work, parts, accessories, etc.
So do you provide actual spares to people as well as doing the engineering work?
Well, we specialise in making top quality spares, which is the main problem in this market nowadays, is getting the good quality spares.
So with a bike like this, I mean, would you say this brings it up to, now this isn't an insult, but it brings it up to modern day Japanese standards, is it?
Nearly. Our basic aim is to apply modern technology and practices to the old engines to make them reliable and up to scratch.
And they don't leak oil?
Not if they're built right, no.
But I'm not being facetious there, but I mean, they have been known to, haven't they?
This one.
It's got oil in?
Yes, it's a runner.
Tell me, do you do any framework? You know, I know you've done this nice bodywork, but I mean, do you do the whole bike?
We're working on now, we're actually doing strengthened frames and special racing frames now, but we can offer full restoration services. All work's done in-house. We don't trust it to anyone else.
So we're going to see BSAs going on and on for some time?
It will be, hopefully.
Well, we've got lots of classic bikes here, but we've also got a few classic people. These two nattering away, Sammy Miller and Jim Redman. Excuse me, gentlemen, if I could just interrupt. A lot of nostalgia here, isn't there? And it's great to see you two chatting away. You're reliving a few old memories, I presume?
Yes, this is the first classic bike show I've been to, and I think I've been missing something. Especially we sort of old farts ourselves like the bike, so it's good to be here, and the welcome we get from the people. You know, they love this era of racing, and they call it the golden era, and I think it was. And for us, it's fantastic because we come back, and it makes you realise you're gone but not forgotten.
But what's the scene like in South Africa? I mean, it's not as big as it is here, obviously.
Yeah, I did funnily enough, the classic bike show I did with Cork Bellington, whose bike's right over here belonging to Sammy.
Yeah.
And Cork and I did the classic bike show in Durban. But of course you could fit it into a quarter of this, but still it was their first effort, and you've got to start somewhere. Yeah. And we got a reasonably good crowd out, nothing like this, but then we haven't got wall-to-wall people like you've got in England.
Oh, that's true. And Sammy, I see you've been busy wandering around here, and of course you're still well into motorcycling, aren't you, with your museum?
Well, I've been playing motorbikes since I left school, really, and I've had a wonderful career, and I still carry on today with the museum, and these are two of the bikes from the museum. You know, the four-cylinder Honda, which Jim was very much involved with, and the Kawasaki, which is very, very technically interesting, you know, anti-die forks. And I was speaking to Jim why they don't sort of use that technology today. They seem to have gone away from that. But the classic scene is, you know, wonderful in all branches. You know, the trials is even very, very, you know, well supported in the motocross scene and pre-65. And the people here today, it's really, you know, unbelievable. And yesterday, and the classic scene and all the events throughout the year, we're getting booked up more and more. Jim's sort of full time again. You know, we're all back to the old Continental Circus every weekend.
One thing, perhaps to put you on the spot, I know Jim still has a dabble with a bit of celebrity racing and whatnot, if that's what I can call it. What about you, Sam?
Oh, well, I still perform a bit too, and I was out the other weekend in a classic trial, and I got round in 0 points, which is quite good. And I feel I'm very, very lucky. I've been riding for over 43 years and still up there, so that is good, you know.
So how do you fancy your chances with today's Grand Prix riders or World Superbikes?
Oh, it's a different sport. Really super technical and very, very advanced.
I think we blow them all off.
Speak for yourself.
Thank you.
They asked me at Donington, because I was at Donington for the Motorbike Grand Prix, and Chris Carter got me in for a chat like this. Yes. And he said, why don't you get a bike and come and have another go? You're around the scene so much. Yeah. And he said, if you did that, which bike would you get? I said, I'd do what I always did. I'd get a 125, a 250 and a 500 and do the lot.
and win the lot.
And why not? Thanks very much, Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah. Norton's another famous name. The Norton Rotary, perhaps not so famous or infamous in some circles. But I've got John Kenny with me of the Rotary Owners Club. John, a lovely Norton behind us here, a very attractive bike. I bet you're sorry that they're not being made still.
Well, I think we all are. We're particularly sorry that they're not raced. The Norton company's in pretty dire straits, really, in its 99th year, which is a great shame indeed. Because the bikes, although people are a bit frightened of the engines, once they get used to them, not really any problems. Reliability is a lot better possibly than most people would suspect.
Yeah, I understand that the piston seals, well, not pistons, but the rotor seals used to be a big problem, didn't they?
Yes, well, they were, but that was back in the car days, really, RO80s and the like. But the oil technology is the main difference, I think, now. And, of course, with the water cooling, modern ignition systems, most of the problems are taken care of, although it is a very hot-running engine, nonetheless.
What do they like to actually live with then and run with these days, if we can speak over the sound of the tannoy?
Well, if you're used to an old Norton, you could say you ride these instead of having to look after the old ones.
That's going to upset a few.
Yeah, well, to be fair, there's a lot less to do on them. Partly down to the simplicity of the engine and, again, the improvements technically over the years, really.
So what sort of mileage can you get out of the engine then? I mean, are they long-running engines?
Well, there is a machine here, the police bike there, that's done I think it's about 400,000 miles, a little more. And I believe it's not had any major work at all. It's been stripped and examined, but apart from possibly seals, I believe it's all original.